Hey everybody, my name's Kyle, and in today's episode of Helluva UX, we're going to be revisiting CUSP. I was asked to revisit this now that the issues with the server and Cloudflare have seemed to be resolved, and so I wanted to kind of look through the site and give some of my first impressions. The first thing I noticed right away is this custom cursor, and I want to say that I really don't like it. I, unlike maybe not everybody, but I specifically custom tailor my cursor. At least on Windows, to be like the black cursor with the white outline. I find that that's easier for me to see. And so by forcing me to use this little custom circle is really frustrating. You know, I've been using computers and the internet for not very long, maybe about 20 years. And, 20 years of training a mental model of like, this is what a cursor looks like. This is what a cursor looks like when it switches to the pointer, telling you that you can click on something. Like that has been ingrained into people for a very long time. And by forcing them to use like these like little circles, this is a theme or a style that I see done a lot. You're breaking that mental model and you're forcing people to have to think. And in my opinion, good design is intuitive. They don't have to think about how to do something or what something is. They just click on stuff. Or users should just know how to do something or know how to go somewhere. So initially, when I loaded up this web page, it took me probably like a good 5 to 10 seconds or so to figure out like where the hell my cursor was, and that's because it was replaced with this little thin red circle. And so breaking the mental model of the user that way, in my opinion, is not a good it doesn't provide a good user experience. Depending on what the website is and like why people are there, most users will muddle through bad user experience decisions that designers and developers implement because at the end of the day they still want to get to the end goal. But when a user lands on a website, you only have so much time to either capture their interest or try to sell them on your product. And so when you do things that confuse them, they're more likely to leave. It also ran into some similar things where I don't know if this is built with React or Vue or Angular or whatever, but it's definitely some sort of client-side rendering. I can tell because when I click on this, I'm not seeing like the native browser page loading. So it's definitely some sort of client-side UI framework that's doing all this. And I did initially run into some performance issues. Now, I don't have like a top-of-the-line machine, but I have 16 gigs of RAM, pretty modern i7 processor. I'm running a GeForce RTX 2070. Like, I shouldn't be having performance issues on a website. And I did notice some noticeable lag with some of the JavaScript implementation when I was trying to transition from page to page or initially try to open this menu. And there's just some of the side effects of like having to force the client's PC or the user's PC or their device, I should say, to like have to render the entire user interface versus shipping a bunch of HTML and then just shipping a little bit of JavaScript and CSS to make them do stuff. But I prefer more traditional websites where everything's rendered server side and isn't so much focused on making the end user's device work as hard. As for this carousel, I didn't know right away how to transition. I will say good on the developer and the design team for allowing you to use arrow keys to transition back and forth. That's a really nice touch. However, when I first landed on this page, I was clicking and dragging and I couldn't figure out how to transition to the next slide. Eventually I went into the menu. That's another issue I've noticed is where sometimes I'll click on this and like the touch target is like a little too close. So I'll miss it a little bit. And then that also probably comes down to the fact that my cursor has been switched to this little circle. And so it's a little bit harder to try to gauge where to be clicking. I mean, it does change sizes, but again, you've broken the user's mental model of how a cursor should act and a pointer should act on a website or on a computer in general. And so by switching over to this, I noticed that sometimes I'll click and it doesn't actually register the click. It's very frustrating. But anyways, I go into this menu and I started to scroll. And as soon as I had to scroll through here, it clicked in my head of like, oh, hey, I can go back to this thing and I can probably scroll. And then I scrolled and was able to transition. That's also then when I realized I can use arrow keys. So good on the developers for allowing arrow keys to be liable or to allowing the user to go from slide to slide. However, what I was looking for initially was some sort of button or some piece of UI that allows me to transition from slide to slide to slide. You don't have to always have like pagination jots to jump to a specific slide, but having like a little arrow here and a little arrow here maybe to allow the user to click to go from slide to slide really helps. Forcing them to have to like then solve the problem and think through like, oh, maybe I can try an arrow key. Like that's a lot harder and it's a lot more taxing on a user compared to just giving them a button within the carousel to transition from one slide to the next slide. Along with some of like the little performance issues that I noticed, there was some noticeable delay when I was trying to go from page to page, at least initially. Everything seems to be fine now, but on my first visit, again, I was running into some of those weird performance issues. And at the time, I'm using the Chromium version of Edge, so the newest version of Edge, and this was my only tab open. No other software. I just booted up the computer for the day, so I shouldn't have had anything running that was chewing up a ton of my processor, a ton of space and memory, and so I shouldn't have been having these issues. And this is just kind of some of the side effects you get when you decide to use some sort of, again, UI framework and make the client's machine do all their rendering. Now it's possible that there's some server issues, and maybe this is all just HTML and CSS coming down from the server, but the fact that we're jumping from page to page and I'm not seeing the little browser spinner appear, and I'm not seeing these native browser requests to go from page to page, I'm assuming is some sort of UI framework that's rendering all this stuff. Another thing is I have no idea what this little circle does. I've clicked it a couple different times to try to view pages, but I don't know. I'm not complaining about it, just confused. So if we jump over to the Lighthouse report, you can see, there's some performance issue stuff here, and we have blocking time and some speed index stuff. Overall, I'm not really a fan of like this initial, when you load, we have to load the website. I'm more of a fan of getting stuff as fast as possible and getting user to the content. And there are studies to show done by Google and Amazon and I believe eBay as well. Those are more or less e-commerce sites, but still they show that the longer you make your user wait to get to the content, like the first, having a first like contentful paint is really important. You can get like there's like a first contentful paint or contentful paint, and there's like a first meaningful paint, and the goal isn't just to get the page to paint real fast. It's not just to get the browser to paint quick. It's to get them to like a meaningful paint as fast as possible. So, again, most likely this is some sort of UI framework, so you have to hide it behind a loading screen as all that JavaScript is loaded up, and then figuring out what page it's on through some sort of router, and then it has to build everything out and create all the elements and all the nodes in the DOM. So it's just the side effect of picking this specific technology. Ideally, if you could use something like Next.js or Nuxt.js and do this all on the server, and then just, again, ship down that HTML. But that's just what I prefer, and I think it provides a better, faster user experience. But other than that, not really anything else to complain about. I did want to point out, here's a website, in my opinion, that does like a custom cursor effect, but then also provides still a decent user experience. So on this site, I still have my default cursor. So it's set up with like different speed settings and the style and the size to look exactly how I want it to look. I've optimized it to what I think works best for me, the user. But I still, when I hover over these things, I get this kind of like little green dot that appears, and it kind of like globs around the different buttons, but I still have the native pointer cursor. So it tells me that, hey, this is clickable. It's going to bring me somewhere. If I go down here, the little glob kind of like jumps from spot to spot. So I don't mind if you allow the user to have like their default cursor custom tailored to like their specific settings for their operating system. But and like allowing them to have some sort of like little trailing effect, like that little glob could follow me around, and I'd be okay with that. It, I guess, could be distracting, but I'm fine. But I do find it annoying when I get completely hijacked and I'm then forced to deal with someone else's design decisions, and you've now said, I don't care about how much, or I don't care about what you've done to your system to tailor it to work best for you, or to be, I don't know if there's any accessibility concerns. I'm guessing there probably is, but I'm not an accessibility expert, so I can't speak into that too much. But I just find it really frustrating when stuff like this happens. Now, this is in contrast to, remember the pinball kind of like web app foosball game video that I did like a year or two ago. They had a custom cursor, and it was the same thing. It's kind of delightful when you move it around. It kind of skews the shape and the direction in which you're moving. So yeah, you get some delight there, and it feels good. But this is, some sort of like agency website trying to sell the clients on working with them or doing photo shoots or whatever they're trying to sell. Whereas that one was a game. You're playing foosball on the web, and it was to play around with, like, I don't know what, if it was WebGL or 3JS or whatever they're trying to play around with. It was a full-on game. So hijacking a cursor for a game makes sense because people who play games are going to be used to having custom cursors for the game. However, when you're building a web page and you're trying to sell something or your brand or whatever, leaving it to the default cursor and then considering adding like a special effect like the little glob or having something trailing off or whatever that helps then push the brand's image and the brand's voice a little bit more, in my mind, is a better solution. One other thing I really liked about this website, so it's not all negative, was this gallery page. I like how this like infinitely scrolls. You can just click and kind of drag around, throw it around. You can see a ton of their, I assume, their work. This was a really cool page. It's a great way to kind of look around and see what they're capable of. All right, that's it for me today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.